Having a proper test specification and test infrastructure is vital to be able to execute tests. Let's look at the overview of the test specification process. So as an input, you take any kind of requirement, also called the test basis, which we look at in more detail on the next slide. And then the person doing the actual test specification is then converting this test basis and the requirements into test cases or test sets, or sometimes also other formats that are used then in the test execution. So as said, the test basis is the input for the test specification and is a reference to the test object. And this can be any kind of specification or requirement of the software product or the feature. It can be also a description of the use cases. It can be input that someone gets from discussions with experts. It can be KPIs that you then test against, or it can be requirements from certification programs, regulations, or laws. So really basically anything related to the test object can be used. And it's then the responsibility of the quality assurance team or the test manager to filter this input and also to identify gaps that might exist and to bring it up to the responsible people then. Once the proper test basis is available, the next step is the actual test case creation. And there are various approaches to create test cases. So there are very systematic and formal approaches where the test basis is closely linked to the test case itself. So for example, if you test the validity of an input through the boundary value analysis, it's usually specifically defined in the specification what is allowed and what is not allowed. Then you have a use case testing where you can actually test an abstract layer of the specification defined by use cases. And this approach is very important for system test. And there are experience-based approaches. Here the test basis is no longer tightly linked with the test specification. So you have exploratory testing where you have like guidelines on what to test, but you do no longer follow a very specific test case. Then there are other topics to consider when it comes to creating test cases. So you should follow a very systematic structure with preconditions, actions, and expected results. Then there are usually test case guidelines in place which are specific for a project or an organization. Same with keywords that you can use for test cases, and if you use it, it's very important to be consistent with it. And besides the actual content, there are also other attributes like priority, status, and etc. for test cases. Next, let's look at the test infrastructure, which is also an essential precondition before you be able to execute tests. So here you, of course, have a project-specific environment and certain requirements that you need to consider. So depending on the product, you may just use like software solutions, or in complex embedded systems, you usually also have hardware that you need to test in combination with the software at some point. So the doing here is to enable and to set up a test infrastructure that is up to date and can be used for testing. So here in the project you have a huge initial effort for it, and then continuous little effort to always update the test infrastructure and to maybe configure it for specific tasks. And here is an overview of some factors to be considered when it comes to test infrastructure. So there are certain types, and on a high level you have partial systems that, as the name suggests, only involves parts of the whole system under test. Then on the other hand, you of course have the full system where everything is included and aims to test the customer setup. And there are certain simulation-based setups where you simulate environments or certain components. Then you usually have some kind of measurement equipment to trace or log data, and you can use certain sensors to also collect data. Might be also just a camera to observe behaviors. Then the systems that consist of hard and software need to be updated in certain periods or cycles. Then there are or might be certain configurations of one test infrastructure to enable testing product variants. And a certain test infrastructure also might allow for simulation of behaviors or signals or data, which is also important to test all test cases and scenarios. And finally, there might be some third-party utilities, so complex systems may connect to accessories, smart devices, or other products that need to be considered in the test infrastructure as well.